Welcome back, drama lovers. Today, we uncover the explosive truth behind the Shaw family's fateful DNA test. Grab your tea because the karma served today is absolutely piping hot. On New Year's Eve, my older brother, Casper Shaw, attempted to expose me as a fraud and announced that Jenny Ford was the real heiress to the family. He pulled out a paternity test result and threw it in my face. Open your eyes and take a look. Jenny is the Shaw family's real daughter. You're just a fake who has taken Jenny's place for so many years. Yet you still have the nerve to sit here and eat New Year's Eve dinner with us. Then he pushed Jenny in front of us, revealing a face that looked exactly like my mom, Teresa. Everyone froze. I lunged for the report. But suddenly, a stream of floating comments rolled past above Jenny's head. Is the female lead finally going back to her rich family and starting a sweet romance with her fake older brother? Not yet. Right now, they still think they're siblings. They only get together later, once the misunderstandings are cleared up. Am I the only one who feels bad for the female supporting character? She's the biggest victim in the whole book. She takes all the female leads. Hatred that should have gone to her fake brother. And she gets treated as the fake heiress and sent to the Ford family to suffer. On top of that, I looked at Jenny's face and compared it to my own. We almost look like twins. I checked our ID cards again, confirming that our dates of birth were exactly the same. Seriously, ever think that you might be the real imposter here who has switched? At birth, I was the heiress of the wealthy Shaw family. And everyone adored me, everyone except my brother. He had always dreamed of swapping me out for a different little sister. When I was 3, he secretly switched me with the nanny's daughter. When my parents, Zane and Teresa, found out, they smacked his butt until it was red and sore. When I was 5, he left me in a park. In the end, he was the one who almost got kidnapped by traffickers. He was only saved because the police happened to pass by. When I was 15, he got some punk with dyed hair to hit on me. It turned out the guy liked men and ended up following my brother for 3 days and 3 nights. Instead, after that, my brother actually behaved for a few years, and I thought he had finally accepted me as his sister. I never thought that on New Year's Eve, he would give me a huge surprise. On the one night the whole family was together. Dad, Mom, today I'm going to expose Joan as a fake. She doesn't deserve to eat the Shaw family's New Year's Eve dinner. Casper suddenly shot to his feet, pulled out a little hammer, and smashed the wine glass in front of me. Wine splashed all over me, and Mom hurried over with paper towels, frantically trying to wipe the wine off. Me? Dad slammed his hand on the table, frowning as he yelled at Casper. Where are your manners? Who told you that you could bully your sister like this? He just gave me a look full of contempt, then turned and let a girl in from the doorway. She was wearing the haute couture dress that had been made for my 18th birthday, the sapphire necklace Mom had given me, and the emerald bracelet Dad had bought me on her wrist. I glared at the culprit. Casper, what's wrong with you? You smash a wine glass for no reason, and just hand my things to someone else like they're nothing? Casper threw a paternity test report at my face and said smugly, because Jenny Ford is the true heiress of the Shaw family, the real daughter Mom and Dad actually gave birth to. You stole the first half of Jenny's life. So, what if you have to hand over a few things? They were hers to begin with. As he spoke, he pushed Jenny in front of us, so that everyone could see her face clearly. Mom and Dad both froze. Jenny really looked too much like Mom. Mom took great care of herself and looked like she was barely in her 20s. Two of them stood face to face like they were looking into a mirror. Meanwhile, I didn't look much like Mom. As I stood off to the side, my heart tight, I was about to grab the report Casper had just thrown at me, when I suddenly saw words floating above Jenny's head. Finally, this is not the same old real versus fake era story. After the female lead goes back to her rich family, she is going to start a romance with the imposter son. Real heiress versus imposter son. Heir, I love this pairing choice. Was so shocked. I stumbled back and the bullet comments on Jenny's head vanished. I rubbed my eyes, stepped forward again, and the comments reappeared. So this is the real heiress is unlucky little victim. The female supporting character really has it rough. One paternity test, and the whole family decides she is the fake heiress. Female lead is hostile to her, and the imposter son keeps making things hard for her. Even her parents, Zane and Teresa, grow distant. She gets sent to the Ford family to suffer. But in the end, it turns out to be one big misunderstanding. Who would not have a villain arc after that? Real heiress, imposter son. Unlucky victim. There was too much information. I stood there in a daze while Casper shielded Jenny behind him, as though I was a thief. And snap. Don't even start getting any bad ideas. If you dare hurt Jenny, I won't show you any mercy. Remember this, Jenny is my real sister who shares my blood. And you're nothing but a fake who stole her place. I understood it now. It was not about me being a fake heiress. It was about the imposter son. Casper was the imposter. Thinking about what the bullet comment said, I gathered that I would be treated as a fake heiress and become the next big victim whose identity Casper had stolen. I turned around, picked up the test report, and tore it into tiny pieces before anyone could react. I then tossed the shredded paper into the trash, and then turned back before spreading my hands as I said, Casper, you need evidence if you're going to accuse someone. What makes you think I'm a fake heiress? Is the supporting character a shredder? That report was thick, and she just ripped it up like nothing. The imposter son is so mad that his face is red. Why do I find this a little satisfying? But if she does that, the female lead will just misunderstand her even more and think she is some vicious fake heiress who stole her place. I glanced at Jenny. Her eyes were a bit red and she looked like she'd been picked on. But when she looked at me, there was a tiny bit of caution and anger. So small you could barely see it. It really did seem like she had already taken me as an imaginary enemy. Casper rushed to the trash can and tried to rescue the scraps of paper. He squatted on the floor and worked on them for a long time. But he could not even piece the cover page back together. His fists clenched so hard his knuckles popped. If Mom and Dad were not standing right there, he would probably have smashed them into my face the very next second. Even without the test report, I can still be 100% sure Jenny belongs to the Shaw family. The moment I saw her, I had this strange feeling that she had to be my sister. Meanwhile, a fake will always be a fake. Don't think tearing up the report means you can keep lying to yourself. And freeloading off the Shaw family. The corner of my mouth twitched. I gave him a slow, meaningful smile. No one knows yet who the imposter truly is. Casper thought I was calling Jenny the fake. And he shot me with a vicious glare. Then turned to comfort her. Jenny, don't worry. She can't steal your identity. I'm firmly on your side. Jenny sobbed as she said thank you, Casper. Then she raised her tear-filled eyes and looked at Mom and Dad. Dad, Mom, I know it's hard for you to accept the truth right away, but I really am your biological daughter. The female lead looks so careful and pitiful. She must be afraid that Zane and Teresa will choose the female supporting character and not her. But the female supporting character is innocent too. She is also their daughter. Why force the sisters to fight? Don't you guys think there's a plot hole here? The female lead and the imposter son were the ones switched. So she should be the same age as the imposter son. How did things develop into her being switched? With the female supporting character? When the female lead was little, she was not even properly registered in the system. They only put her on the books later when she started school. Her date of birth was filled in without careful consideration. And she ended up the same age as the female supporting character. By accident. So that was it. I silently thanked the bullet comments for clearing it up for me. Looking at Jenny, Mom felt like her heart was aching. And her eyes turned red before she even realized it. She felt an overwhelming sense of closeness to the young woman in front of her. Like Jenny really was her own daughter. She could not help walking over to take Jenny's hand. And when she felt how rough her palm was, her heart ached. Suddenly, Mom remembered I was still standing off to the side. Even if I really was an imposter, she had raised me for 18 years. To her, both of us were precious. She could not bear to give up either of us. After thinking for a moment, she turned her head and said to her husband, Honey, no matter which of these two with our biological daughter, we'll take the other in as our adopted daughter. No, Casper jumped in right away, his face full of disdain as he looked at me, Mom. She's just a thief who stole everything that belonged to Jenny. If I had not found Jenny, she might have been stuck in poverty her whole life, while she was living in luxury in the Shaw family. Jenny was suffering. I don't agree to let her stay here, and I want her to kneel and apologize to Jenny next to me. Jenny was so thin, she looked almost frail. My dress hung loose on her, and even her hair was dry and split at the ends. All of it proved she had been through a lot. The bullet comments above Jenny's head explode again. I can't believe that imposter son had the audacity to say that. He's the real thief. He's the one who should kneel and apologize to the female lead. His real parents have beaten and yelled at the female lead. since she was a kid. She clearly got into college. Yet they forced her to drop out and work at a club as a hostess. Bring drinks. The male lead is innocent. He never wanted to be switched at birth. And he has done a lot to make it up to the female lead. He is only talking like this now because of a misunderstanding. He just thinks keeping the fake heiress around would not be fair to the female lead. He didn't do anything wrong from his persona, but he's the one who benefited from all of it. The bullet comments argued back and forth, but my attention snagged on those words. Either beaten or scolded and forced to drop out and be a hostess. My real older sister had lived that kind of life for 20 years. I suddenly understood Jenny's hostility toward me. If I were her, I would not be able to make peace with someone stealing the happy life that should have been mine. But the person she should hate was not me. It was Casper. I gave Jenny a long look, then spoke calmly. If I'm not Dad and Mom's biological daughter, I'll leave on my own. I don't need you to say it. Casper let out a cold snort. Then you're definitely leaving, Dad. We have to do another paternity test tomorrow, to give Jenny an answer and to make Joan give up. That was exactly what I had been waiting for. That night, the sprawling Shaw mansion felt more like a mausoleum than a home. I lay in my bed, staring blankly at the intricately painted ceiling, replaying the chaotic events of the New Year's Eve dinner over and over in my mind. Casper's vicious smirk, my parents' shattered expressions, and Jenny's cautious, traumatized eyes all blended into a swirling nightmare. I knew I had to act carefully because the floating bullet comments had revealed the invisible script governing our lives. Casper was the supposed male lead of this twisted universe, blessed with plot armor that naturally drew sympathy and excused his toxic behavior. The original story wanted to frame him as a tragic, noble hero who only acted out of a misguided desire to protect the real heiress. But I had lived with Casper for 18 years, and I knew the cold, unvarnished truth. He did not love Jenny, he only loved the immense power and unassailable status that came with being the eldest Shaw heir. Unable to sleep, I slipped out of my room and padded quietly down the carpeted hallway toward the guest wing. A thin sliver of warm yellow light spilled from beneath Jenny's heavy oak door. I hesitated for a moment, raising my hand to knock, when a sudden cluster of neon text floated right through the solid wood. The female lead is having a panic attack. She is so hungry because she didn't get to eat dinner, but she is too terrified to sneak into the kitchen. In her abusive adoptive family, taking food without permission meant getting locked in the freezing basement. My poor baby, someone please hug her. My heart clenched painfully inside my chest. I immediately turned around, tiptoed down the grand sweeping staircase, and slipped into the massive chef's kitchen. I warmed up a large mug of milk, added a generous drizzle of honey, and plated a few soft chocolate pastries. When I returned to the guest room, I knocked gently, just twice. "Jenny?" I whispered, keeping my voice as soft and non-threatening as possible. "It is Joan, and I brought you a midnight snack." There was a long, suffocating silence before the door clicked open just a fraction of an inch. Jenny peered through the narrow gap, her dark eyes wide and incredibly defensive. She looked at the warm food in my hands, and her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice raspy and trembling with exhaustion. "Casper said you would hate me for trying to steal your parents." I let out a soft, bitter sigh and nudged the door open just enough to hand her the tray. "Casper says a lot of things, and 90% of them are carefully crafted lies. You are my mother's biological daughter, which means you belong in this house just as much as I do. Eat the pastries, Jenny, and try to get some sleep. Tomorrow, the DNA test will reveal the truth, and I promise you, neither of us will be the ones leaving." I did not wait for her to formulate a response. I simply turned and walked back to my room, leaving her to process the fact that her supposed arch-nemesis was the only one offering her genuine comfort. The next morning, the heavy tension in the luxury SUV ride to the private hospital was thick enough to choke on. Jenny sat huddled defensively against the leather door, her eyes fixed blindly on the passing city streets. Casper sat in the front passenger seat, radiating an aura of absolute, arrogant confidence. He even had the audacity to hum a cheerful, upbeat pop tune under his breath. He truly believed he had orchestrated the perfect coup to secure his undisputed position as the sole heir. When we arrived at the pristine, white-marbled clinic, Dad's personal medical team was already waiting for us. The head physician, Dr. Heiress, personally oversaw the collection of our blood and hair samples. "I want this expedited, Heiress," Dad commanded, his voice rough and gravelly from a lack of sleep. "Run the panels on all 4 of us, myself, Casper, Joan, and Jenny. Casper scoffed loudly, dramatically rolling his eyes as a nurse swabbed his arm with alcohol. "This is a complete waste of time and money, Dad. Joan is just trying to muddy the waters to delay her inevitable eviction." I stared at him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral and unbothered. "If you are so confident in your royal bloodline, Casper, a simple cheek swab should not threaten you." His jaw clenched tightly, but he quickly masked his irritation with a condescending sneer. We were ushered into a VIP waiting lounge, where the next 3 hours stretched into a grueling eternity. Mom sat beside Dad, anxiously twisting her diamond wedding ring around her slender finger. I watched the bullet comments occasionally pop up above Jenny's head. The suspense is literally killing me. Does the fake heiress really not know she's biologically related? Wait until Casper finds out he dug his own grave. I am going to laugh so hard. Finally, the heavy double doors swung open, and Dr. Heiress walked in carrying 3 thick, sealed manila envelopes. Casper instantly shot up from his leather armchair, reaching out greedily like a starving dog. "Give them to me," he demanded, his voice cracking with desperate anticipation. Dad intercepted him immediately, snatching the envelopes from the doctor's hands with a stern, warning glare. "Sit down, Casper," Dad growled, his patriarchal authority leaving no room for argument. Dad took a deep breath, breaking the wax seal on the first envelope with shaking hands. He pulled out the crisp medical document, his eyes scanning the complex genetic markers until he reached the bolded conclusion at the bottom. A profound, shuddering breath escaped his lips. "It is Jenny," Dad announced, his voice thick with overwhelming emotion. "The probability of paternity is 99.99%. She really is our biological daughter." Mom burst into loud, racking sobs, rushing across the room to pull a completely rigid Jenny into a desperate embrace. "My baby," Mom wept, burying her face in Jenny's tangled, dry hair. "I am so incredibly sorry we lost you for so long." Jenny stood frozen, her hands hovering awkwardly in the air before she finally, slowly wrapped her arms around Mom's waist. Casper clapped his hands together slowly, a triumphant, malicious grin spreading across his face. "Beautiful, simply beautiful," he mocked, turning his predatory gaze onto me. Now that the heartwarming reunion is out of the way, it is time for the parasite to pack her bags. "Read the next one, Dad, so we can finally kick Joan out into the gutter where she belongs." Dad completely ignored Casper's cruel taunts. His brow was deeply furrowed as he opened the second envelope, sliding the paper out with deliberate slowness. As his eyes tracked across the page, his expression shifted from solemn anticipation to absolute, unadulterated shock. He blinked hard, pulling his reading glasses from his breast pocket and shoving them onto his face as if the paper was playing tricks on him. This cannot be right," Dad muttered, his hands trembling violently. Mom looked up, her face stained with tears. "Zane, what is it? What does Joan's test say?" Dad looked directly at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and overwhelming relief. "Joan's probability of paternity is also 99.99%. She is our daughter, Teresa. They are both our biological daughters." The silence that crashed down on the room was deafening. Casper stumbled backward, his hip violently hitting the sharp edge of a glass coffee table. "That is mathematically impossible," he roared, his face flushing an ugly, mottled red. "You only had 2 children, a boy and a girl. I am your firstborn son, and I brought you the real daughter. Joan obviously bribed the lab technicians to fake her results." I stood up slowly, crossing my arms over my chest as I looked at Casper with chilling calmness. "Are you implying that our father, a billionaire who literally funds this hospital, is too stupid to secure a reliable DNA test?" "No, the math is not impossible at all, Casper. You just have not factored all the variables into your little equation." "Dad, please read the final envelope." Dad swallowed hard, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat as he tore open the third and final envelope. The air in the room seemed to evaporate entirely as he stared at the words printed on the stark white page. His broad shoulders slumped, and the paper fluttered from his weakened grip, landing softly on the carpet. "0, Dad whispered, his voice completely hollow and devoid of life. 0%. Casper, you share no genetic markers with either of us. You are not our son." The collective gasp from the room felt like a physical shockwave. Above Casper's head, a massive flurry of neon bullet comments exploded into existence. "Holy mother of plot twists. The male lead is the actual fake heiress. Wait, fake son. My mind is completely blown right now." He literally spent 18 years bullying Joan because he thought she was the fake, but he was the cuckoo in the nest all along. Casper let out a guttural, animalistic sound of pure denial. He dropped to his knees, scrambling frantically to pick up the fallen paper. His eyes darted wildly across the text, searching desperately for a typo, a glitch, anything to save his crumbling reality. No, 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 this is a setup, he shrieked, tearing the paper in half in a fit of hysterical rage. I am a Shaw. I am the heir to the Shaw enterprise. I have your nose, Dad, look at me. Dad took a slow, agonizing step back, physically repulsed by the young man he had raised for 2 decades. You look nothing like me, Casper. And now I finally understand why your cruel, vindictive nature always felt so utterly alien to our family. Mom pressed her hands against her mouth, her eyes darting between Casper and Jenny as the horrific truth finally clicked into place. If Jenny is our daughter and Joan is our daughter. Mom stammered, her voice breaking. Then the baby who was switched at the hospital 20 years ago. It wasn't Joan. I finished for her, my voice ringing out clearly in the quiet room. Jenny was never 18. When her abusive adoptive parents registered her for school, they simply guessed her age and wrote down whatever was convenient. She is 20 years old, just like you, Casper. Jenny let out a tiny, stifled gasp, her dark eyes locking onto Casper with a terrifying, absolute clarity. The young man who had showed up at the dingy nightclub in a tailored suit. The savior who had offered to rescue her from her abusive, impoverished life. He was the very same person who had stolen her luxurious, loving life in the first place. Suddenly, a strange, shimmering golden light seemed to envelop Casper's trembling body. The bullet comments above his head turned a chaotic, flashing red. Warning, male lead plot armor activating. The universe is trying to force the original romantic storyline. He is going to use his charm to manipulate the female lead into forgiving him. Casper's hysterical crying abruptly stopped. He slowly lifted his head, tears streaming dramatically down his handsome, perfectly sculpted face. He looked up at Jenny, his eyes swimming with a perfectly calculated, heartbreaking vulnerability. Jenny, he whispered, his voice dripping with a hypnotic, sorrowful magnetism. Do you understand what this means? We aren't siblings. I didn't know the truth, I swear on my life I didn't. But maybe it was fate that made me find you. He crawled closer to her, reaching out to grasp the hem of her cheap, frayed skirt. The universe brought us together so I could rescue you. We can still be a family, Jenny. I can protect you forever, just like I promised. I could physically see the invisible force of the narrative trying to warp Jenny's mind. Her eyes grew slightly glazed, the deep-seated trauma and desperation for love making her incredibly susceptible to his toxic, romanticized manipulation. The original book demanded that she fall in love with her glamorous abuser. Step away from her, I barked, my voice cracking like a brutal whip across the room. I marched forward and kicked Casper's hand away from Jenny's skirt, breaking the hypnotic spell instantly. The golden light around him shattered like cheap glass. Jenny blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if waking up from a deep, drug-induced slumber. She looked at Casper's outstretched hand, and suddenly, raw, unfiltered hatred flared in her eyes. Rescue me. Jenny spat, her voice trembling with decades of repressed rage. You drove to that nightclub in a $500,000 sports car. You wore a watch that could have paid for my college tuition 10 times over. You lived in a mansion, eating gourmet food, while the woman who gave birth to you beat me black and blue for dropping a dirty dish. Jenny took a step forward, towering over the pathetic boy kneeling on the floor. You are not my savior. You are the parasite who sucked my life dry. Casper flinched violently, his male lead charm completely useless against the harsh, undeniable reality of his own privilege. Dad immediately pulled out his phone, his face set in stone as he dialed the police commissioner directly. I want a full investigation into Margaret Ford, Dad demanded into the receiver. I want her arrested for kidnapping, child abuse, and grand fraud. And I want security to clear Casper's belongings out of my house immediately. Over the next 48 hours, the Shaw family's world underwent a massive, brutal cleansing. The police dragged Margaret Ford and her alcoholic husband out of their filthy apartment in shiny steel handcuffs. During the intense police interrogation, Margaret arrogantly confessed to the entire crime, bragging about how she had outsmarted the wealthy elite. She proudly admitted that she had swapped the name tags on the bassinets because she wanted her biological son to inherit an empire. When Casper was brought into the precinct for questioning, Margaret reached out to touch his designer coat through the metal bars. "My brilliant boy," she cackled, her yellowed teeth showing in a grotesque smile. "Mommy did it all for you." Casper vomited right there in the police station hallway, completely broken by the reality of his hideous, criminal origins. Despite his desperate pleading and pathetic tears, Dad remained absolutely immovable. He set up a modest, tightly controlled trust fund that would cover Casper's basic living expenses and community college tuition, but strictly barred him from ever using the Shaw family name. Casper was stripped of his luxury cars, his black credit cards, and his elite social status overnight. He was unceremoniously dumped into a small, mediocre apartment on the outskirts of the city, forced to live the mundane life he so deeply despised. With the toxic tumor finally excised from our family, the healing process could genuinely begin. Integrating Jenny into our world was not an easy or magical overnight transition. She flinched when doors closed too loudly, hoarded non-perishable food in her dresser drawers, and apologized constantly for simply existing. But I utilized the bullet comments above her head as an emotional cheat code. She really wants to try the piano, but she thinks her hands are too ugly and rough to touch the keys. Seeing this, I dragged her to the grand piano in the parlor, slamming my own hands clumsily against the ivory keys to make a horrible, discordant noise. "I am terrible at this," I laughed, pulling her onto the bench beside me. "Please, you have to help me figure out this melody before Mom fires my music tutor." Jenny's tense shoulders relaxed, and she tentatively placed her fingers on the keys, discovering a natural, beautiful rhythm hidden within her soul. We spent our evenings locked in her newly decorated suite, doing face masks, watching trashy reality television, and slowly dismantling the walls around her heart. Mom and Dad poured every ounce of their love and vast resources into making up for lost time. They hired elite private tutors who quickly realized that Jenny possessed a staggering, genius-level intellect. Freed from the constant, crushing anxiety of poverty, her mind absorbed advanced economics, foreign languages, and corporate strategy like a sponge. Within 8 months, she was sitting in on Dad's executive board meetings, casually pointing out flaws in multi-million-dollar merger proposals. The original book had written her as a helpless, tragic female lead whose only purpose was to be saved and loved by Casper. But in reality, she was a terrifyingly brilliant apex predator who had finally been let out of her cage. Meanwhile, updates on Casper's miserable downfall occasionally trickled into our lives. Without the protective shield of the Shaw Empire, his arrogance quickly alienated everyone around him. He tried to launch a tech startup using his meager trust fund, desperately attempting to prove he was a self-made genius. But without Dad's connections to secure funding, and without his lackeys to do the actual heavy lifting, the company collapsed in less than 3 months. The bullet comments kept me thoroughly entertained. The former male lead was spotted working as a valet at a luxury hotel. He accidentally scratched a client's Ferrari and threw a massive tantrum. He got fired on the spot. Karma is honestly the best writer in the world. As the 1-year anniversary of the fateful New Year's Eve dinner approached, the Shaw family decided to host a massive, opulent winter gala. It was officially framed as a charity fundraiser, but everyone in high society knew it was Jenny's grand, undeniable debut as the eldest Shaw heiress. The ballroom of our estate was transformed into a glittering winter wonderland, draped in thousands of imported white orchids and illuminated by massive crystal chandeliers. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my dressing room, smoothing the silk skirt of my custom crimson gown. Jenny walked in, wearing a breathtaking midnight blue dress that made her look like royalty. Her posture was impeccable, her skin glowing with health, and the haunted, fearful look in her eyes had been entirely replaced by a sharp, unshakable confidence. "You look incredible," I told her, stepping forward to clasp a diamond necklace around her throat. "Are you ready to show these snobs who truly runs this city?" Jenny smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up the entire room. "Only if you are standing right beside me." We linked our arms and walked gracefully down the grand marble staircase together. The massive crowd of wealthy elites fell completely silent, their eyes locked in awe on the 2 beautiful Shaw sisters. Dad puffed out his chest with immense pride, taking the microphone on the central stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate the unbreakable strength of family. I am incredibly honored to formally introduce my brilliant, beautiful daughters, Jenny and Joan Shaw." The room erupted into thunderous, polite applause. But the perfect moment was abruptly interrupted by a loud, violent crash from the foyer. The heavy mahogany doors were shoved open, and a disheveled, wild-eyed figure stumbled past the security guards. It was Casper. He looked utterly pathetic. His cheap suit was wrinkled and stained, his hair was greasy, and he reeked strongly of cheap whiskey and desperation. The glamorous crowd parted around him in absolute disgust, murmuring in shocked, judgmental whispers. "Jenny!" Casper shouted, his voice cracking loudly as he completely ignored the security guards lunging for him. "Jenny, you have to listen to me." He dropped to his knees in the center of the pristine ballroom floor, tears streaming down his gaunt face. The golden male lead aura desperately tried to flicker to life around him one last time, a pathetic, dying gasp of the original plot. Warning: the antagonist is attempting a public emotional manipulation. He thinks if he creates a public spectacle, the female lead will take pity on him to save face. I took a step forward to intervene, but Jenny gently placed her hand on my arm, stopping me. She didn't need my protection anymore. She stepped gracefully off the bottom stair and walked slowly toward the pathetic boy kneeling on the floor. She looked down at him, her expression completely unreadable, cold and untouchable like an ice queen. "What do you want, Casper?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the dead-silent room. "I love you," Casper sobbed, reaching out as if to touch her designer shoes. "I have always loved you. The money, the status, none of it matters without you. I have changed, Jenny. Take me back. Tell Dad to let me come home, and we can be together just like we were meant to be." Jenny stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. Then a soft, chilling laugh escaped her lips. "You don't love me, Casper. You love the reflection of your own lost power standing in front of you. You look at me and you see the Shaw family vault. You see the yachts, the private jets, the respect you threw away with your own 2 hands." She took a deliberate step back, her eyes hardening into sharp, unforgiving daggers. "I spent 20 years eating out of trash cans because your mother wanted you to wear silk. And when you finally found me, your first instinct was to destroy the only other innocent sister in this family so you could keep it all for yourself." Jenny signaled the head of security with a sharp, elegant flick of her wrist. "Throw this trespasser out. And if he ever comes within 100 feet of my family again, I will personally ensure he spends the rest of his pathetic life sharing a concrete cell with Margaret Ford." The large, burly guards grabbed Casper by his armpits, dragging him ruthlessly across the polished marble floor. He screamed and thrashed, kicking his legs wildly, but his voice was quickly muffled as the heavy doors slammed shut behind him forever. The original male lead had officially been written out of the story. The ballroom remained completely silent for a few seconds before I slowly started clapping. Soon, Dad joined in, then Mom, and within moments, the entire room was filled with a deafening, genuine roar of applause. Jenny turned back to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears of absolute triumph. The floating bullet comments above her head flashed brilliantly one final time. "The greatest character arc in history. The real and fake heiresses didn't fight each other. They destroyed the patriarchy and the toxic male lead. This is the happy ending we all deserved." The neon letters slowly dissolved into the air, turning into a shower of warm, golden sparkles before vanishing completely. The invisible audience was gone. The script was officially destroyed. From this exact moment forward, we were no longer just characters in a twisted, predictable novel. We were simply Joan and Jenny Shaw. And as we walked onto the dance floor together, hand in hand, I knew with absolute certainty that the future we were going to write would be nothing short of a masterpiece. Wow, what an incredibly satisfying conclusion. Seeing Joan and Jenny break the toxic cycle and completely dismantle Casper's pathetic savior act was absolute perfection. This story proves that true family isn't about blood or status, it is about standing fiercely together against the darkness. Casper thought he could manipulate his way back to the top, but he vastly underestimated the power of true sisterhood. If you loved watching the real and fake heiresses rewrite their tragic destinies to become total queens, smash that like button and subscribe for more epic drama. Until next time, keep writing your own story.